My name is Susan Rossney, and you are very welcome to this Ask the Expert event in our series of webinars that we're putting on to answer your sustainability questions. I'm joined today by Chartered Engineer Joe Borza and founder of Energy Elephant. Joe is a Chartered Engineer, as I mentioned, and also has a cloud-based software platform which allows businesses to monitor their energy use and their carbon emissions. It's a wonderful platform. It's something that we, as a business in Chartered Accountants Ireland, use ourselves. And the reason we thought this would be a very interesting topic as the Ask the Expert series event is because a temporary business energy support scheme has been introduced by the Irish government in the budget. It was also recently extended to case to professional businesses, as was announced in the finance bill, and it's there to assist eligible businesses with their energy costs during the winter months. It's being administered by the Revenue, but under the Revenue guidelines, businesses wishing to avail of this scheme must first tick a box declaring that they've completed a carbon footprint exercise and that they're taking steps to reduce their energy use and environmental impact. But the question is, what is a carbon footprint and how does one go about measuring it? So to answer these questions, I want to invite Joe along to talk. Joe, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you.
I was going to start with a very simple question that I've just already uttered, which is, what is a carbon footprint and how do you go about measuring it?
Thanks, Susan, and hope everyone's well today. So I suppose carbon footprint is something that's very topical at the moment, especially with the COP27 going on at the moment in Egypt. So carbon footprint is essentially the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted directly or indirectly based on the product or service or business or activity that's carried out. So it's usually in tons of carbon equivalent, so carbon dioxide, but it can include lots of other gases, greenhouse gases as well. So the typical unit that's used is tons of carbon emissions. It's CO2e from an equivalent point of view. So that's the units that are usually captured. So it's a bit like a currency. And then how that's composed of is usually based on it's usually based on energy, but there are other greenhouse gas emission sources as well. So that's usually around electricity use, gas use, heating oils, etc., and other fuel types that are consumed, usually for heating, transport, or electricity generation, for example.
Of the emissions that a business is responsible for. They either generated themselves or they cause it to be generated by their customers, their clients, their staff.
Yeah, no,
okay.
It's usually covered under a grouping of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3.
Mm-hmm. And scope 1 being, like for instance, in Chartered Accountants Ireland, our scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions are when we run the boiler, and that's burning fossil fuels, that's burning gas. Our scope 2 is our energy, our electricity use, where somebody else is burning fossil fuels potentially to give us electricity to turn the lights on, etc. And then our scope 3 might be executive travel or our commuting, as an example.
Exactly. Yeah. Scope 3. I think under the terms of the TBES scheme, what I think the government are looking for from most businesses is probably scope 1 and scope 2. So it's the direct emissions from burning fossil fuels or emitting greenhouse gas emissions. It's from the electricity consumption, because obviously there's greenhouse gas emissions emitted from the power stations that produce electricity. The scope 3 side of things is obviously depends on the organization. It could be very kind of high level stuff, so just flights and transport, etc. Indirect emissions, but it could be the embodied carbon in the buildings you're building. It could be supply chain that you consume as part of your services that you provide.
So for our members, we have obviously a membership base that stretches from small to medium practitioners who are advising businesses and obviously are running their own premises themselves, all the way to members who are financial controllers in huge multinationals and in the public sector. So there's an enormous variety of members who may be called upon to be now monitoring this, or at least measuring their carbon emissions. And as you mentioned, carbon emissions isn't just the carbon dioxide, it is all the other, say, small refrigerant gases, are the methane, maybe the nitrous oxide that's produced, but they're all grouped together under this one kind of a currency, which is carbon dioxide equivalents. That's why we see so much about CO2. So that's measuring, that's what you have to measure. So when you're measuring it, like say we in Chartered Accountants, we first looked at this as a business. The first thing I did certainly was just ask for the electricity invoices. And is that, say, the first step that companies should do when they're starting this exercise of carbon footprinting?
Yeah, I suppose if you put your accountancy hat on, you start with the bills because you have them usually. Mm-hmm. And that will tell you the quantity of what you've consumed. So you'll know the quantum of gas you've consumed in meters cubed or in kilowatt hours, whichever the invoice is provided in. You'll have your total electricity consumption in kilowatt hours. You'll have your other fuel sources, let's say liters of diesel, liters of petrol, etc. You might have some on-site renewables and things like that, but obviously, generally speaking, they're counted as zero greenhouse gas emissions because there's no direct emissions from using them. But you basically build up your profile of all the different fuel types you're using, and then you'd use a thing called a carbon conversion factor. And that's where you multiply the units that you've consumed by a factor, which will be, let's say, 10.2 for heating oil or something like that. And that will convert it into a carbon dioxide equivalent. And that means that everything is standardized. So you can compare electricity to gas, to petrol, to diesel, to other fuel types. Whereas if you were looking at it directly, 1 liter of diesel is not the same as 1 meter cubed of gas, which isn't the same as 1 kilowatt hour of electricity.
Okay. So for me, that doesn't sound like a straightforward exercise. I can understand. I sooner obviously have somebody do that for me and then provide me with something that will provide. How's the best way to describe this? I want to just find one figure at the end of it. And that's what the tools that are being provided to companies, that's what they're doing. Would that be right? So they don't have to make these calculations themselves.
Yeah, I suppose it'd be similar to the way you might have different currencies. So if you've got sterling, euros, and US dollars coming into your business, you obviously don't, you have to bring them into whatever current core currency that you're reporting under, let's say euros. So there will be some kind of conversion to bring them across. The conversions for carbon are fairly standardized. So there's a good methodology out there, and you can just doing a quick search online, you'll find the conversion factors that are used. The one tweak to that would be most countries have their own unique carbon conversion factor. So gas in UK will be different to the gas conversion factor in Ireland, which is different to the gas conversion in France, etc. So if you're a multi-site, multi-jurisdictional business, there's probably a little bit more work involved. But if you're just in Ireland, there's probably just one conversion factor for gas, which you can apply to all your gas usage.
Okay. And so just sticking with Ireland then, and going back to the TBES, the Business Energy Support Scheme, when Revenue stipulated that businesses applying had to check the box to say they had done the carbon footprint exercise, they also provided information about the climate toolkit for business that's available from the Government of Ireland. And I was going to share my screen so I can let people look at what this looks like, in real time. And bear with me, I'm just going to share this and hoping that people should be able to see this. Okay, so this is the climate toolkit for business that the Government of Ireland has provided. Now, as we understand, businesses are not obliged to use this, but this was given as an example of a toolkit that they can use. It's free, and it also allows them to, say, input content from their invoices, and then at the end of it, they're given a kind of an emissions profile, a carbon footprint in essence. So this is how it looks. And I've tried this myself and uploading some invoices, but actually, as I mentioned earlier, we're actually using Energy Elephant in the Institute, which is a very straightforward platform to use. But with this one, to create their carbon footprint, I can see here that there are several different kind of headings.
Yeah.
And so first, go on, yeah.
I suppose it's a good way. It's a very good way for a business to get a first step on the carbon footprint, and it's a good way of seeing what the high level things you should be covering are in your business, your organization around carbon footprinting. I mean, the big one for most businesses is going to be energy, followed probably by travel. So the big one usually is the energy use directly in your buildings, your vehicles, and your assets. And then the secondary ones will be around travel. And the big one around travel that's probably not captured would be things around flights, because flights are very energy intensive. Yeah.
So if a business wanted to go into this, they would say put in something like, let's say, food and drink manufacturer, their size, let's say it's Imagine that, and they have their own buildings, and then they just go through these steps. And it's quite a useful site in that it provides them with information about where they can find this content. So for instance, electricity, they say provide the annual volume or cost of your electricity use, and then they give you a tip to say it's going to be on your bills. And here's, you put in your number of kilowatt hours, likewise with gas and likewise with heating oil. LPG, liquid petroleum, is that, what is LPG?
Yeah, liquid petroleum gas.
Liquid petroleum gas, heavy fuel. So I'm assuming that businesses will know what this is once they're kind of getting into the weeds of this and they assemble their invoices. And then you just click through these steps. And as you say, travel is one of the issues that allows you to put in your petrol. And I love the way they give a tip saying it might be in your expenses system as well, your accounting process. So they very much are weighting this towards the accountants and finance professionals to provide this information. The business flights, I found that was quite interesting in that some companies will have a spreadsheet, or they can get a spreadsheet from their travel providers. So if a business is booking flights through a travel agent, those travel agents often will supply them with an Excel spreadsheet which has already quantified the carbon emissions. Have you come across that before?
Yeah, it's something we actually do ourselves. So it depends on the travel operator, but the way they're usually done is the very simple way is what you can see here in front of you, which is how many short haul flights and how many long haul flights have you done. Now, obviously, it's less accurate if it's, a long haul flight could be to Turkey, or it could be to New
Zealand. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So obviously there's a big difference between those if you're just looking at long haul versus short haul. The way our system does it is we actually do it on a per airport basis. So we take the starting airport, we calculate the distance to the landing airport, and we calculate the carbon footprint associated with that travel, basically distance traveled, and then the seat type as well. So if it's business class, if it's a coach, if it's economy class, etc., there's a different conversion factor because the seat takes up more room, so you can have less people flying in a plane if they're all in business class, etc. So there's an associated higher carbon. But yeah, it's definitely one that I think most businesses will be surprised by how big the carbon footprint is of the business travel flight side of it.
Okay, yeah, and I'm assuming that many businesses then could take action if that was where they wanted to cut emissions by traveling less frequently, if possible, or else by changing the way they travel, or well, I don't know, can businesses change the distance? But certainly they can input this content, and that will provide them with a more accurate and information. And then you've got, say, materials and waste. That's obviously going to depend on the business, what kind of information they need to input here. And then the numbers of the waste produced is always there. As I said before, you get that from your invoices. So if it's Panda, or if it's Greyhound, or wherever it is, they'll provide you with the green bin, brown bin and black bin weights, and water usage. So once you've put all that in, then you can generate the action report. And this is all, as I said there, on the government site, the climate toolkit for business, and that gives you the carbon footprint. So that's something that businesses can use then. Obviously, there's no data in here yet, but when you have inputted your data, you can see the tons of CO2, which what you mentioned earlier, this is how carbon emissions are measured, or how greenhouse gas, the warming gases are measured. It's in tons of CO2. And this then is what you can say is your carbon footprint that you then can save or share or download. So I'm going to stop sharing this because another aspect of the business energy scheme was to, it stipulates that businesses have to make some efforts to reduce their energy use and reduce their environmental impact. And so you would have some tips around that, around energy use, maybe to start with.
Yeah, and I suppose there's very few businesses out there that have not tried to reduce or become more efficient in energy use, especially over the last 6 months. So I think this is preaching to the converted when it comes to saying you have to take measures.
Yeah.
So I mean, the way I always start with this is to start with, well, what do people do at home? Like, so, you know, if it's upgrading their lighting to LED lights, that's obviously an easy one to do. If it's turning down the thermostat by 1 degree, which everyone talks about and you hear it in all the ads on the news at the moment, etc. But it does actually have a big impact in your energy usage within reason. Like, obviously, if you're at 18 or 17 degrees in your house, you don't want to be cold. But if you're at 23, 24 degrees and you can turn it down by 1 or 2 degrees, it has a big impact on the energy use for the building. And it's good to try and take, you know, I always try and get organizations to look at using a thing we use, which is called giant steps, small steps and giant leaps. And this is like, there's little baby steps you can take, like turning out the lights at the end of the day, turning off computers when they're not used at the weekends, etc. And then there's giant leaps, and the giant leaps are the hard things, like, you know, upgrading your boiler system to a heat pump, or, you know, converting from gas to electricity, or switching from a diesel vehicle to an electric vehicle. And they're much bigger, much more complex decisions to be made. You need a combination of both.
And I think once you go for it, then it becomes a bit easier. Like the electric vehicle step is an example that once you kind of have made that decision and go through the steps, then people tend not to look back. Yeah, they're very happy with the EVs when they get that, and when they've installed the fast chargers. And I'm making this sound very easy. I know there are, as you said, steps to go through. It isn't necessarily always easy, and there's work to be done by the government and organisations to make this more streamlined for businesses. But certainly people see the rewards. And actually on that, I had a question in earlier, which was, do you think businesses should prioritize stopping doing certain things or starting doing certain things? Like, is it easier to turn out the lights rather than install LEDs, or does it make a big difference either way?
Yeah, I suppose it's part of a longer term plan for most organizations. So I mean, if you look at what's been talked about in COP at the moment around what the world needs to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which will help reduce the impacts of bad elements of climate change. The real focus is trying to get to net zero by, let's say, 2050, give or take. So it's still far enough away that, you know, we've lots of time to get there. But in the short term, there's talk of trying to get, you know, a 50% plus reduction in emissions by 2030. 2030 is only 8 years away. So it's actually quite close. And organizations might be doing things today to reduce energy costs today, because it's obviously a very severe energy crisis at the moment. But in the longer term, they need to think about, well, what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and where do they need to go? And I think we hear a lot now from companies saying that they're coming under pressure as part of the supply chain. So their clients are saying, you're part of my supply chain, and I need to be dealing with my supply chain because that's where all my emissions are. So you know, people are being asked to look at electric vehicle upgrades. They're looking at switching out from fossil fuels to renewable sources, etc. So you do need to think short term, but also the longer term picture as well. So
short term would be, as you were saying, look at what you do at home, bring that into the office space. So turning off lights. One tip I saw was, you know, boil it the way you don't boil that much water in a kettle at home. Do the same thing in work. Don't leave files up against a radiator, for instance, all those kind of basic things. And then planning for the future, which might be to swap your existing incandescent bulbs for the LEDs, which is an investment, but will be repaying over 2 years, I think is the current time. I think that you get the benefit then in a couple of years' time for that.
It's a lot longer than that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it lasts longer. Yeah. And there are grants available for this as well from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland for homes and for businesses, which is quite good to know. The other issues that certainly I noticed from our business here is to look at the way the business is running its say the lagging, for instance, the small things like the lagging. We had an issue in the roof of Chartered Accountants Ireland where seagulls were eating the lagging that was around the pipes. And once that was, we had to go through various things like waiting for the seagulls to stop nesting, then putting the net up. And now the net is up to prevent the seagulls getting in. They are not eating the lagging. We can replace the lagging and thereby and the saving is enormous in the amount of energy we use. So it's another piece of advice just for businesses to take a very good look and maybe even get an internal energy audit done.
There is, and I think like the likes of Enterprise Ireland, etc., support companies getting consultants in to help them with some of those things. Same with SEAI,
Yeah.
and I think the IDA actually provides support services for the foreign direct investment companies as well. So I think there's definitely measures that can be done. I think the first step is always trying to do an initial review yourself. It can just be a gap analysis.
Yeah.
So what do we have currently? Where are the gaps in it? Before you bring in a consultant to kind of do a deep dive into the kind of strategic level things. So it could be, you know, short term, but the longer term strategic stuff as well. So it's not always cheap for an organization to do these big changes. So trying to do a mixture of the easy and the hard together is definitely the way to go, I think, for a lot of them.
Because then you see some wins as well, which is energizing, gets you on to do more. And I do understand that the SEAI has a grant for businesses as well if they want to get an energy audit. I think it's up to 2,500 of a grant for an auditor that's registered with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, which is another source of information that businesses can use. That website, which has got a lot. So there's, as I said, there's plenty for businesses to do. It is a very challenging time, but then it's interesting how it's come together now. So you've got an energy support scheme from the government, but it's administered by revenue, which is saying if you want to get this, the eligible businesses must show they've got the carbon footprint and show that they're making some efforts, as like you're suggesting there, to reduce their energy use. And interestingly, maybe that also is by extension their environmental impact. Just finally, before we finish up, when you mention the environmental impact, is there a minimum that companies can do, like a certain percentage of time to be devoted to this? Or are there any quick wins that businesses can enjoy in reducing their environmental impact?
So I think it depends on the business, but I think the first thing is to talk to your staff and see what the staff think, because generally the staff know what's happening within the organization and the business, and they'll be able to highlight things that they think should be done. And sometimes it's very, very quick wins when you do that. The other benefit of getting staff involved is if you can get them to take some of the things they're probably doing at home already, to bring down their energy costs and bring them into the office, that has a big benefit to the organization as well. I mean, it could be simple as don't wear shorts in on a -5 degree day or something like that. I know I did a lot of work with Trinity College just across from Chartered Accountants Ireland. It was always the energy manager in there was always giving out about the fact that you'd be going in on a snow day and there'd still be students strolling around their shorts because they had to keep the building so warm that they could do that as opposed to put on a pair of trousers or jeans. So like it's a case of trying to get the behavior side of things is a big part of it, as well as the projects side of it. So keeping a mix of the two things. And I suppose the other side of things would be I think a lot of younger staff as well have come through the education system, etc., and know a lot of the things they would have done in, say, Green Schools program, things in university, and then come into a big organization which may not have actually looked at these things in the past and can bring fresh and new ideas to things that might have just been assumed to be de facto can't be changed. So it's always worth getting early.
I think certainly, and you mentioned COP there, which is the International Climate Summit. It's the conference of the parties and the world's biggest climate conference, taking place over this week and next week in Egypt. And certainly that will be making reference to many things rather that you think can't be changed, but have been changed. And we've seen in our own lifetime the kind of changes that that we've seen in the internet that has brought in telecoms, in the way we live, the way we work. Even the past 2 years especially has transformed the way we work. So it looks like transformation is inevitable, and it's possible for businesses to survive and thrive within that. But there will be steps that they need to take. Joseph, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And your company, Energy Elephant, is, as I mentioned earlier, is the platform that Chartered Accountants Ireland use. And before I finish up, I just wanted to let people know that we have a lot of information on Chartered Accountants' website. It's on the Sustainability Centre. In the Resources tab of that centre, you can find information on financial supports for sustainability-related projects. I mentioned Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, but there's a funding that you mentioned as well, Joseph, available from, say, Enterprise Ireland. So there is certainly assistance available for businesses, but you will find a lot of information on that hub. It's all free there. free to download, and please don't hesitate to contact Chartered Accountants Ireland as well if you've any further questions. So I'm Susan Rossney, a Sustainability Officer here, and you can email me at any time if you need any further information. Thank you very much for attending this Ask the Expert interview, and have a wonderful rest of the day.